Thanks so much, Katie and Reed. Thank you so much for inviting me tonight. And it's an honor to be asked to come back to Pavillon, though I left 3 years ago. I don't think you could ever leave Pavillon after for me, I worked there for close to 14 years. So, and I'm seeing some familiar faces. And so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to provide to Katie handouts that I'm going to be using today. I'm hoping that everybody has a 12 and 12. I think that's sort of a mandatory kind of book for us to have. We're going to start off with that, and we're going to end with some newer stuff that's been coming out. I can remember, and also also a recovering addict, and July 9th of 1992, I made that decision, and I woke up in a detox center. So there's that joke that you got two clean dates, one when you enter treatment, and then the other one when they took off your Velcro straps. So I needed some Velcro straps in the beginning for sure. So, all right. So and that wasn't my first go around either. I think my first attempt in recovery was 1989, and a few detoxes and treatments and a bunch of meetings and stuff like that. I finally got it July 9th of 1992. But one of the words I had problems with the steps. When I first came in, I could remember clearly seeing the words character defects. And also I struggle with God and a few of the other ones, but that one got my goat for some reason. Like, am I defected? Am I a defect? All of the, committee stuff that was going on. And so, of course, getting a sponsor and working the steps, my sponsor had me do a lot of the reading. And one of the readings I want to start off with, I'm going to share my screen right now. And we're going to start off on page 42 in the 12 and 12. And so could I get a volunteer to read? And we're just going to read the first two paragraphs. All right. So could I get somebody, a volunteer, to read the step and the first paragraph, please?
Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Creation gave us instincts for a purpose. Without them, we wouldn't be complete human beings. If men and women didn't exert themselves to be secure in their persons, made no effort to harvest food or construct shelter, there would be no survival. If they didn't reproduce, the earth wouldn't be populated. If there were no social instinct, if men cared nothing for the society of one another, there would be no society. So these desires for the sex relation, for material and emotional security, and for companionship are perfectly necessary and right, and surely God-given. Yet these instincts, so necessary for our existence, often far exceed their proper functions. Powerfully, blindly, many times subtly, they drive us, dominate us, and insist upon ruling our lives. Our desires for sex, for material and emotional security, and for an important place in society often tyrannize us. When thus out of joint, man's natural desires cause him great trouble, practically all the trouble there is. No human being, however good, is exempt from these troubles. Nearly every serious emotional problem can be seen as a case of misdirected instinct. When that happens, our great natural assets, the instincts, have turned into physical and mental liabilities.
And so when I read that, I remember going back to my sponsor going, hey, dude, I mean, look, these things called character defects, are they really just misdirected instincts? And I remember him nodding his head going, yeah, they are, Joe. And, for us, he said, those instincts that are, like Bill wrote here, God-given, necessary for survival, go through this twisted, distorted type of molding to where now they are these defects of character. So now I want to fast forward to what I want to talk about today, and that is, as a counselor, you have to constantly go get CEUs and, education. And one treatment modality that's been really I've been interested in for the past probably 12, 13 years is a treatment modality called acceptance and commitment therapy. And one of the founders of acceptance and commitment therapy, Stephen Hayes, wrote this wonderful article. And I'm going to share that article with Katie, so this way everybody could get a copy of that. And I truly, truly believe that after we're done today, you'll have a better understanding of why I have those defects of character, why those misdirected instincts are there. And I think on one side, it gives us that sense of relief of, all right, I'm not defected. I'm not like, there's nothing really wrong with me in that sense. But yet on the other side, it gives us an idea of how we need to proceed with this thing called the mind, and where a lot of these misdirected instincts arise. So I'm just going to kind of paraphrase a little bit of this article, and then we're going to talk about different aspects of it as well, too. But have we ever wondered why we do the things we do, the irrational and unhelpful ways, even though we full well know better than that? For instance, why do we often worry about imaginary problems in the future, even though we know they'll most likely never happen? Or why do we care so much about what complete strangers think of us, people that we've never met and never will again? And why do we constantly feel the need to criticize ourselves or beat ourselves up over the smallest mistakes? Anybody can relate to that? Making a mistake and there's that like baseball bat hitting us, even though we know that's not helpful at all. So the human mind, is full of quirks and flaws. Of much of what we think and do doesn't really make logical sense until, and this is where I think for me, I had that aha moment. Now, I remember reading the 12 and 12 back in 92, but this article came out in 2019. This is what made it click. That is until we look at our evolutionary past and the ways that our modern use of our cognitive abilities creates what we call an evolutionary mismatch. All right? So it's our ancestors' fault for the way we are. So if we're going to blame anybody, we could blame the folks that lived a couple thousand years ago in the caves and the grassy plains of savannah. It's their fault why we are like we are. And so for much of our human history, like Bill wrote, we lived in small little tribes surrounded by all these challenges from the natural world. Just imagine living in those caves or in the grassy savannas of Africa where dangerous animals will always lurk nearby, or hostile enemy bands that could fight over scarce resources. In those tribes, we learned to work together, manage these threats and challenges, and we're more likely to have children of our own and pass on the genes to the next generation. But that skill required being sensitive to the potential signs of danger, both directly through learning and conditioning, so behavioral strategies could be applied. Learning signs of danger by associative learning is 500 million years old. 500 million years we've been doing this and passing the genes on from one generation to the next. So being able to avoid threats based on symbolic processes like, hey, I saw a beast by the river, watch out, don't go down there. is more recent, apparently uniquely human skill, but we've had time to get good at that. Nowadays, though, we live in a very different environment, right? You're all sitting in the house or in a room with windows and air conditioning or heat, right? You have cars to get you safely from one point or another. We don't have dinosaurs ready to kill us or tigers ready to get us, right? We're pretty safe. And then Stephen Hayes says this: with this insight in mind, many of the mental ailments that plague so many of us begins to make more sense. The problem is that human symbolic learning is now overextending our skills from long ago. So for instance, number one, 5 daily struggles that make sense. 1, imagining danger and predicting the worst. Who here can identify with that? Right? I see a lot of hands up. Yep. And so in modern times, we often struggle with negative, fearsome thoughts. We are quick to see the danger and assume the worst is yet to come, right? Negative thinking, it seems, makes life harder and more difficult than it actually is. We are safer as a species than ever before, but we've never felt so threatened. It's not hard to imagine that every stranger we come across on our way home at night is to be a convicted criminal ready to get us. Try that on purpose just once and you'll be surprised how easy it is. But now go back a couple thousand years ago, detecting possible danger was critical for the survival of us and our tribe. Suppose you saw a fuzzy round shape in the near distance. You could be a positive thinker and assume it's just a big rock and I'll go on my way. Or alternatively, you could be a negative thinker and assume the worst and think that's actually a big bear waiting to kill you. If you make a mistake as a negative thinker, no big deal. You get scared, you change your route, and that's about it. However, if you make a mistake as a positive thinker and the rock turns out to be a big bear, well, you've just become lunch. Within limits, negative thinking is the better strategy, which is why you and I descended from a long line of negative thinkers and danger detectors, right? You get that? So the problem now is that the vast majority of our dangers are cognitively created. Our minds come up with these scenarios. We could worry about just almost anything. If we cannot rein in that part of our minds, our natural tendency to detect and avoid danger can overwhelm our ability to live. So that's number one. Number two, ruminating about hurtful memories. Who here has ever done that? Right? You think about scenarios where you made a mistake or you maybe stuttered or maybe you really did something that hurt somebody that you loved. So a lot of times we could go over and over our hurtful memories. We remember the times where we said something embarrassing or when we felt the most vulnerable or hurt. Even though that memory happened a long time ago, we can still feel the sting as if it happened yesterday. Our mind makes us relive that pain again and again and again, whether we like it or not. Hence, that's where a lot of people will struggle with PTSD. And that's what I work with just about every day now. Though in an evolutionary time frame, thousands and thousands of years ago, rehearsing past dangers likely helped avoid them. Suppose you encountered a dangerous animal and barely made it out alive. It was likely useful to replay the experience in your head and review the struggle in detail. What you did wrong, what could have you done different? It may have better prepared you for the next time you encounter that wild animal. To some degree, ruminating lightly increased our ancestors' chances of survival. Though as our minds evolved, as the symbolic problem solving took over in our minds, we could ruminate over more and more things, slights, fears, our health, our abilities. I was ruminating about something this morning. I woke up and I saw something on my toe and I'm like, that must be cancer. I'm going to die like next week. You know, I mean, I right away go right straight to, the worst. What once has been helpful has been combined with symbolic abilities that make now this process toxic. Number 3, worrying about what other people think. In modern times, we often worry about our reputation, right? Anybody ever worry about what others think about you? Any hands up for that one? Yeah. We often worry about our reputation. We worry about our status and what other people might say about us behind turned backs. And because of our worry, we set up rules for what is and what isn't acceptable behavior. We invent rules for what we are supposed to wear, what we are supposed to say, and even what we're supposed to think and feel. Though, think about it, thousands and thousands of years ago, worrying about your reputation was yet another survival skill or advantage. Humans are extremely vulnerable by themselves, and if our ancestors wanted to survive, they needed to ensure their position within the group. By tracking how we impacted others, our ability to cooperate, to survive increased. Social sensitivity was a benefit back then. Now, the problem is that failing to have enough likes on Facebook or on your Instagram account or on your Twitter can feel like being cast out of the group. We can police our every behavior, making our life smaller and smaller and smaller with each additional rule. As we play false to avoid being excluded, we feel false even when we are included. Number 4, self-comparison and I am not good enough. Anybody relate to that one? Whew. If I could put up my foot, I would put up my foot, but you would see my cancer spot that it's going to kill me next week. So I don't want to show you that. But in modern times, we frequently compare ourselves and our achievements to others. And whenever we fall short of expectations, which inevitably happens from time to time, we're quick to raise the stick and beat ourselves up. We see our shortcoming as a failure of character. We conclude that we're simply not good enough, leaving us feeling hurt and vulnerable in that process. But in prehistoric times, thousands and thousands of years ago, what mattered most was not whether people felt good about themselves or whether they outperformed everyone else. Instead, what truly mattered was whether we could work together to survive. Some degree of self-comparison was likely an advantage. Watch young children play games, and you'll see that some degree of emotional pain over losing is a motivator to close the gap between themselves and others, right? So I did a Wall of Fear lecture for many, many years. And I remember one part of the lecture where, I would talk about how important it is for us to experience envy. Now, there's nothing wrong with envy. Jealousy, on the other side, is, us wanting to have what somebody else has and we're willing to possibly take it from them. But envy is, one little kid looking at his older brother going, I want to reach the doorknob like he does one day. And how important that is for us to do that. Now, self-comparison and self-criticism can go on to insane lengths. For one thing, we're no longer comparing ourselves to our fellow clan members. We're comparing ourselves to fictional life stories, Photoshop pictures on the internet or magazines, or the gold-plated bathrooms of the rich and famous, or the Jersey house show or whatever. I don't know. I heard about that show, but we can imagine if we are not practically perfect in every way, we're just not good enough. No wonder both narcissism and personal insecurity are on the rise today. And then number 5 is always needing more. Now, I think all of us can relate to that, right? I used to say I was addicted to more. If it felt good, give it to me. I want more of that. So in modern times, people never seem to be satisfied with what we have. We always chase the next best thing. I want that iPhone 14 when it comes out. And I want that M1 MacBook and that studio display, and hoping it will give us fulfillment and happiness we have been waiting for so long. Unfortunately, the moment we achieve our goal, our newfound happiness quickly wanes off. The newly acquired car becomes just another car, and we turn our eyes to the next big thing on the horizon. The unchecked need for more is a recipe for greed and psychological suffering. Though in prehistoric times, thousands and thousands of years ago, seeking out more of positive things was absolutely essential. In the scarce environment, having more food, more weapons, more of any type of resource was a survival advantage. The restraint was practical and physical. Even a king might not have what a lower middle class person can have today. In the present, though, our mooring is killing us and the planet we live on. So, as you see here, and again, this article was written by Stephen Hayes, and he's joined up a lot of professors. This one, I love research. I love going down wormholes of this new upcoming field called evolutionary psychology, contextual behavioral science. And it's these great thinkers that are coming together, kind of seeing, what Bill Wilson wrote in the 12 and 12 back, in the 1950s. Bill was spot on. He knew exactly what he was writing about. And remember, we won't stop what we've evolved to do. It's this instinct that we have inside us that's driving us at all times. You will not stop having difficult thoughts and what might go wrong in the distant future, nor will you be always able to resist the urge of ruminating or of worrying about other people's opinion or comparing yourselves to others or yearning for more. We're simply not that kind of monkey. However, though, we could learn to change our relationship with ourselves, and we could learn to change our relationship with our thoughts without getting caught up in them. Instead of being scared by our inner mental life and letting it dominate our action, we could notice it and refocus on what actually matters. This will take time. It takes patience, and most of all, it will take practice. So whenever we get caught up in difficult thoughts and feelings, we could take a deep breath and ask ourselves how a struggle like this could have helped us with our past ancestors, right? For me, looking at that thing on my toe, my past ancestor thousands of years ago, it probably would have been useful for him to have that looked at quickly, right? It might bring us a greater sense of self-compassion. And guys, so great to hear Greg Dahl coming next week. Definitely come back for Greg Dahl. I mean, if there's anything, you don't want to miss Greg. Greg is an amazing counselor. I've known him for years. He's down in Columbia, South Carolina, and he's just a really cool guy. So helping us understand why we think and do the things we do then starts eliciting the self-compassion. More often than not, you'll find that your problem-solving mind is just trying to keep you safe and in the group or in the herd. It's just the kind of monkey we are. So before I go into the next part, and it's just going to take a little minute here before we do, I just want to ask if anybody wants to share about anything they related to in that reading. Realizing that drive thousands of years ago was a survival mechanism to ensure you and your tribe's survival in possibly a world that was with scarce resources. And think about the folks that didn't collect and gain all the resources they could, they eventually died off. So the ones that lived were the ones that were genetically encoded, misdirected instinct, beautifully broken, as Mark Ludholm would say, folks that made it. And that gives us a sense of self-compassion. So what I want to do next is I want to introduce you to how do we deal with our mind. So a lot of us in AA, most people here kind of go to meetings, AA or NA. Who here has ever heard the term, the committee is going off? Anybody ever use that? The committee, right? or the itty bitty shitty committee. And there's a few variations of that as well, too. Just our mind always churning out thoughts, right? And these thoughts can lead to many, many different forms of suffering. One from addiction. Another side is anxiety. The other side of the spectrum is depression. And then, of course, we also have PTSD, that reliving of the memories over and over and over again. And so what do we do when our mind starts taking over? And I want to first introduce this part. First of all, if you think you're going to be able to get those thoughts, those memories, those feelings out of you, you are heading down the wrong path. The bad news is, I'll start off the bad news because we all want to start off the bad news, is that those thoughts, memories, physical sensations, and emotions are never going to go away. Our mind is built like that. Our mind is almost like a calculator without a delete button or a minus button. And it's there because of evolution. We needed to remember that black fuzzy thing by the river, that was a bear, right? We needed to remember that. Those berries killed so-and-so, and I want to remember not to eat those berries, right? So through the process of evolution, we got to a point to where our mind, there's no such thing as unlearning. We cannot get rid of those thoughts, those feelings, those physical sensations, and those memories. But we could start forming a different relationship with them. All right, so let's do this. In conjunction with Pavillon and the Pavillon Alumni Department, and a few other sponsors, we're going to give one person $10,000 next week if you can remember these three numbers. All right, so everybody, no writing it down, Ken. I see you're going to try to write down the numbers. No, you can't cheat. Put out of bed. See if you can remember. Okay, are you ready? The numbers are 1, 2, 3. All right? That's the numbers. And so a week from now, I'm going to approach one of you and I'm going to ask you what the numbers were. How many people think that next week they'll remember what those numbers are? Right? Okay. Well, sorry, there's no money. I was lying. But I wanted to show you how our minds work. You will always remember those numbers that Joe mentioned that. Or for instance, let's take a look at this. All right, I don't want anybody to think about a hat. All right. If you think about a hat, I don't want you to think about it. Don't think about hats. Get hats out of your mind. And instead, I want everybody to think about a donut. All right. So when you think about hats, think right away about donuts. All right. Hats, donuts, donuts, donuts. Think donuts. All right. So right now at this time, you think you got this. Hey, I've totally gotten hat out of my mind and I am going to think about a donut. All right. So I want to show you something. So here we go. So we'll start off with hot, cold, right? Fast, slow, right? Donut, hat, right? Our minds are like that. It's amazing what our minds can do. So if we try to go in and try to avoid or get rid of negative thoughts, we're actually going to create more suffering. And it's not going to work. And the beauty of AA and the beauty of this therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, is that we start having a new relationship with the thoughts that we have. So I'm going to share my screen again. All right. So, how can we start practicing a new way of dealing with our thoughts? And the catchword here is cognitive diffusion. So, looking at thoughts rather than from them. So, it's almost like stepping back and looking at our thoughts like on the computer screen instead of looking at the world through our thoughts. Noticing our thoughts rather than getting caught up or buying into the thought, and letting thoughts come and go rather than holding on to the thought. The purpose of what we call cognitive diffusion is to enable you to be aware of the actual process of thinking so you're better able to reflect objectively and problem solve effectively before taking any action. So here are some really cool techniques. So who here has ever had the thought of, I'm going to fail, or I am a bad person, right? Raise your hand. Does anybody ever have any of those thoughts? I'm a bad person, or I'm going to fail. So instead of saying I'm a bad person, you can say I'm having the thought that I'm a bad person, or I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. Thereby, you're creating some space between you and the thoughts. Remember, our problem-solving mind is there to protect us. Thousands of years ago, evolutionary, our minds work like this, but put into the modern times, it could actually cause much more suffering. Or name the story. If all these thoughts and feelings were put together into a movie titled The Something, Something, Something Story, what would you call it? For example, oh, here's that I'm going to fail story, or no one likes me story, right? A few other things. Passengers on the bus. Just pretend all your thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and memories are like passengers on the bus, and you're driving down the road and they're all screaming and yelling at you. And you know what? You could continue to drive your bus in your valued direction and have them say whatever they need to say. Another one that I do a lot is I carry my most difficult thoughts on small cards, and I carry them with me. And every once in a while, I'll pull them out and I'll look at them, and the thought of I'm not good enough, or why do these people like me? And I'll look at the thought and I'll put it in my pocket. And another good trick too is thanking your mind for that thought. All your mind is doing is trying to protect you. Remember, through evolutionary genetic coding, our mind has been programmed to do this over and over and over again. And we could go, thanks, mind. I appreciate you really trying to help me out here. And I'm going to go up and talk to those people over there. So I'm going to send this, and then there's another one I'm going to send as well too to Katie. And Katie, you'll be able to email these off to everybody. Here is another great list of ways we can kind of take a look at thoughts. Use active language to distinguish between thoughts and beliefs, or physicalizing the thought. See if you could label the physical dimensions of the thoughts. Sound it out. Say difficult thoughts very, very slowly, like, I am not good enough. Boy, it sounds a lot different than when it's going quickly in your mind. You can even say the thought in the Donald Duck voice, for example. Boy, that will really change the context of the thought. Or another exercise I like is, hey, you know what? I'm having the thought that I need to stand up and walk away. And I'm sitting here talking to you. So I could listen to what my thought's saying, or I'm having the thought of picking up a case of beer right now. I'm going to have some water later on, right? Remember, our mind is not our friend. No matter how much it tells you it's your friend, remember, it's not your friend. It's there to problem solve, figure out your checkbook, distinguish red and green lights, and it's not our friend. So here's some other things like monsters on the bus or feeding the tiger. take your mind for a walk, or how old is this thought? So I will send all of these as well to Katie so she can share them with you. I think with what I really the gist of what I wanted to say is our character defects as we read them in the 12 steps. Remember our instincts that are now just misdirected because of our evolutionary upbringing, and now they're in the wrong context, right? Lying, right? If we look at dishonesty, a terrible defect of character. Where can we find the jewel or the gem in lying or dishonesty is, hey, you're really creative. You could think up of a really good story. Why don't you become a writer? Or maybe being manipulative, right? A terrible defect of character. But you know what? I want my attorney, if I'm having to be in court, to be a great manipulator to persuade the judge or the jury to help me win my case, right? Or stubbornness. That could be a terrible, terrible liability. But the gem or the jewel in there is that stubbornness can be holding fast to an idea, really believing in something and doing whatever you can to uphold social justice or women's rights or whatever it might be. All of these character defects that we might label them, so remember, also have a gem in them to where they could really serve us well. So I think I've done my 40 minutes of chatting. I wanted to see if anybody had any questions or anything else they would like to share. Thanks so much, Reed. And I shared this about a week or so ago at a group I was doing, and so we were just finishing up the group, people really digging in there and sharing some really hard, terrible, painful stuff, and it all came down to acceptance. Though I'm still struggling accepting that it's no longer on page 449 in the big book. Somebody decided to move it, but I'm going to work on that. So then somebody in the group said, wow, it's almost like the serenity prayer. And I look at them like, what do you mean? It's like, well, look, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. I cannot change my way of thinking. I can't change the way my mind comes up with all of this mind chatter, right? I can't change that. And I have to accept that for what it is. The courage to change the things I can, he said, Joe, I have the courage, even though all of this painful stuff is going on, I do have the courage to move in my value direction, in moving in what's important to me, and the wisdom to know the difference. There's so much wisdom in knowing, hey, just because my mind said that doesn't mean I have to do that, right? And I thought it was just so profound. And we started off this workshop with the Serenity Prayer, and here we are later on, we're, realizing that, that acceptance, to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage, what can we change? What to do is our behaviors. Pat, what are the numbers? Right? It's still there. Our mind's always going to remember that. Oh, Kate, that's so great, Katie. And that's where I wanted to go for a minute in my talk, and I kind of stepped away. In the Wall of Fear lecture that I think is still being done at Pavillon, I hope it is. Can the Pavillon folks tell me, is that Wall of Fear still going on? And so we know that from day one, when we pop out of our mother's womb till about 15, 16 years old, our mind is absorbing all of these messages. Think about what we could do. We learn a language, we learn a culture, right? We learn arithmetic and math and reading and writing. And our brains are just absorbing all of this material in, and we start forming this paradigm. Now, if we get messages put into us like that critical, you're not good enough, and where even shame comes in then, right? Shame can really be injected into what I call is our read-only memory, right? That's where our read-only memory is being formed. And once that's put in, the bad news is it's never going to leave us. But the good news is we can start forming a different relationship with those thoughts, right? You don't have to buy them. They're going to be there. And think about it. There's a sense of where our mind held onto those thoughts for a reason because it wanted to protect us, right? And so you're absolutely, Katie, that's a great question and a really good comment. Bad news, they're never going to go away. The good news is there's a lot of fun flying the plane in manual. Bad news is you'll never be able to fly the plane in automatic because automatic will end us up back in the place like Pavillon or Detox or something like that. Well, I think just to put in the context of this talk, Ken, is it's a survival mechanism. It was important for us to want to be belonging to a small tribe so that, what you call the labels, the people pleasing and the codependency was a vital part of our survival. So I think that elicits, for me, self-compassion, when I'm recovering from my codependency. Hey, this is a survival mechanism that's been around for thousands of years. It's vital. Now, though, with a twist, it's starting to hurt me because now I'm basing my self-worth upon the approval of others. And so whenever we hear those voices or have those thoughts within our mind going, I need to give up a part of myself for that person to like me, we could practice some of these cognitive diffusion techniques to where we can have the thought that I'm going to people please, but yet we're going to be true to ourselves. We're going to be assertive, right? We're not going to be passive or aggressive, right? We're going to, we can notice the thinking. We can notice the codependency. It's there. It's always running. It's a read-only memory. And probably something happened in your childhood that, installed all of that programming in. It's never going to go away. And though we can still move in our value direction by practicing some of those cognitive diffusion techniques. So like I said, I'll make sure I email them to Katie and everybody else can go along. Let's go ahead and end it with the serenity prayer, but now we are putting it into a new context, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thanks, everybody, for having me.